Welcome back, radio entrepreneurs, listeners, and fans. I'm producer Jillian King, and I'm excited to introduce you all to part 2 of the summer 2023 FBA Family Business Panel discussion. The family business. Is this a family affair? Should everyone in the family be in the business? In this second part, we will be covering topics related to dealing with the emotional aspect of running a business with family members. How do you evaluate the performance of those close to you? Where does loyalty rank in a family business? And much more. If you have not yet seen part 1 of this panel discussion, we recommend you head over to radioentrepreneurs.com or any of our many channels to catch the first segment, where we discuss the complex issues of who to include in the family business and at what stage. All of these discussions are intended to be highly relevant to family businesses, but also entrepreneurs of all types. So be sure to follow Radio Entrepreneurs on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, and any of the many other platforms we stream on to catch the third segment as it goes live. Next, I will introduce our 3 panelists and the moderator for this discussion. We are joined today by Stephen Wilchins, founding partner at Wilchins, Cosentino, and Novins, Rich Hirschen, partner at Gray & Gray, and our guests, Karen Bressler, former CEO of Agar, and David Gordon, president of the Gordon Companies. Welcome back all. Last but not least, a man who needs no introduction, Radio Entrepreneurs host and founder of Mage LLC, JDavis. Welcome, Jeffrey. And I will now hand the conversation over to you.
Well, thank you, Jillian, but no introduction could be positive or negative, so I'll leave that one alone. And I'll move on to the first question. You know, one thing I think all of us know firsthand, we've dealt with in a lot of ways, and that is the emotions inside of a family business. You know, I've worked for big corporations also, and emotions are controlled much more in the corporate environment. So I want to know, you know, we have 2 entrepreneurs here entrepreneurial entrepreneurs who have dealt with business. How do you deal with all the emotional aspects of a family business, and how do you manage them?
Call Jeffrey on your way home from work. Having a sounding board like a family business consultant, I think is key. Like someone who can play middleman and hear both sides of, you know, arguments and people's emotions. And I also think sticking to standard meetings where you can talk to your partner's family members to really understand if something bubbles up, that you have that mechanism of a family business consultant to lean on.
I think being a CEO in a family business is a very lonely place, and because family members can't really identify with what you're going through. You can't really share it with employees because they're not going through the same thing and identifying, and you don't want to reveal too much and cause conflict within the organization. So I think it's very helpful not only to go out and have an advisor like Jeffrey has done for us at Mage, but also even join other groups where you've been able to meet other CEOs, even if they're not in your industry, because I found I did share a lot of those emotional issues with a lot of other people that were running their businesses, whether they were family businesses or not. But it definitely helps to find camaraderie with people who are sharing what you're going through themselves.
Yeah, I think having, you know, whenever you can surround yourself by people kind of independent of the family, whether that be an advisory board of people outside the family, you know, or consultants such as Jeffrey or CPAs or attorneys, I think getting their opinion is helpful, and it's good for the whole family to hear that and understand where they're coming from. So it's, you know, not pointing the finger at, you know, oh, David, you made this decision. It's like, hey, I've met with some independent advisors who are, you know, helping me make these decisions. So I think that's a good thing.
Well, I think David really put his thumb on it, which he did in our first segment once also. And David's a very intuitive person. And that is, I think family businesses need a lot of rules. and they can't feel arbitrary. They need to feel like they're being done for the best thing for the business, and that everybody understands why they're being done. If they're being done and they're felt as arbitrary, they seem to be punishments, punitive, or that someone is out to get them. But I think it's important, and I think it touches the second question, and that is, what rules do families need or should absolutely have for communication at family events? And I think all of us have seen family events get out of control.
You shouldn't talk about business at family events, period.
Absolutely.
Just no, don't do it.
That's the rule.
Yeah,
That's the
don't do it.
rule. And don't talk about about the family business in front of family if you don't want to hear what other people have to say. If you're not going to take because people like to pipe in and give an opinion. And if you're not having that conversation in front of them, then they don't pipe in and give the opinion. My father used to grab me on the weekends in the summer on Friday night, and he knew I needed that glass of wine on a Friday night, but then he'd pull me over for the power hour, and the two of us would just catch up on what happened during the week. It was after he was retired. And that was, so we would find our own time, and that helped manage it, because he also felt like he didn't have access to me all the time because I was trying to work, and he would be frustrated that I wouldn't answer his phone calls and call him back. And so we would spend some concentrated time alone together, but we always made sure those conversations were outside of family ears.
Steve, do you want to contribute to this one? I know you hear about it a lot.
No, I think it was well said by both Karen and David.
Right.
Okay.
Good. You okay? Rich, did you hear me?
No.
Nothing? Okay. Next question. Gets a little bit into what Karen was hinting about, and that is, what should be the structure for an exited or non-working matriarch, patriarch in a family business be for communication about the business? Because, if someone's been working in the business 40, 50, 60 years and they've turned it over, it's kind of tough. They don't know how to, they've been riding this pony their whole life. They don't necessarily know how to get off that pony. And I have a nice story. I won't say which one of you it was, but one of your parents once said to me, I can't talk about the business anymore because they've made it so complicated and grown it so much. I don't know what that business is anymore. Well, I think that's
it was both of us.
I think that could be me. Is that you too, David?
a little bit. This is a tricky one. I think the exited person deserves all the respect in the world, and you have to. Sometimes it feels like you're going above and beyond to communicate or try and explain things, which can be a challenge. It can, and then you sort of get sort of the old school experiences of that person coming into play, and you're really trying to articulate whether that's a vision or why you made a decision, and then you typically get, but that's not how we used to do it, and I think that's where it becomes fatigue of someone like in my position or in Karen's position, where you're like, I can't have another one of these conversations. Like another one of these conversations is gonna burn me out. And so I think you need to prepare yourself to be very mentally tough but you also have to try. And it's going to go like this or like this. You're going to feel down. You're not going to communicate as much as you should. And then I think you're going to kind of get over it and communicate. But I think just keeping it in your mind that you need to have those conversations, both out of respect, and there's nuggets that will fall that you're like, oh, I really didn't think of it that way. So just be patient and carry on because you got to do it.
But as
that all sounds so familiar. Sounds so familiar. Go ahead,
Steve.
As a CEO, you have to understand whether your parent is providing value And it's going to be a balance between experience and being seasoned versus new initiative and where the business is today. And so the idea would be, as an effective manager, is to really assess that and figure out and how to filter that, because they do have value. They have many years of experience, but at the same time, the business continues to change and evolve and develop. So your balance is, how do I seek the advice of my parent at the same time move the business along and have the time to do that?
What we did when my father retired was, because he would just call at these random hours, and it was not really appropriate for me to be chatting at that moment in time when I had other things to do. So we created a flash report with all the data that he was going to ask me about anyway. And it was just, he was a data-driven person. And so we created a report, with a one-page report with literally all the information he was going to probably ask for every single day. And I had my accounting department fill that out and send it to him, because it wasn't really anecdotal. They were numbers. And then we created a structure where we would have then quarterly meetings with him. We did not have a board, but it was, he would say he was the board. But it was also very helpful, because I would bring in my senior team, and we would really stop and do a lot of work for this meeting to provide him even more information with lots of narrative around it. And then he could ask questions, and he would come. We would spend the day with him, and he would spend the day at Agar. And I think it was good, even though it was a lot of work on our behalf, it kept us in a direction, knowing that every quarter we were going to be answering to certain things. And even if you hear that's the way we used to do it, but there was a lot of what they used to do that was important. Like, we were in the meat business forever, and it was a pennies business. And sometimes when you transform the business, people lose sight of the pennies, and then they go to the nickels and the dimes, and we're like, what about the pennies? And so they were always productive meetings when we would do these quarterly. And so I think having a reporting structure set up when that individual steps out from day to day working in the environment was really helpful for both sides. And then, we would have other other conversations, but that was the basic structure.
I'd like to just add something to what Karen said, because I like the flash report and I like the data driven. What we find with a lot of these people of that generation is that they are very data driven. They've been in the business. They grew up in the business before there were all these computers, and they've learned how to just know their business from the ground up, a lot of data. And my original mentor was a famous family therapist, and he told me early in my career, when you're dealing with a control freak, you don't try to take control away from them, because they will fight. What you do is you give them so much information that they have to back off, and you do the reverse psychology thing. And I think that's what you described, Karen. You gave your dad so much data, it was okay for him to back off. And I think that is really much better than that push-pull that some families get into. So I know, David, you were nodding. I didn't know if you wanted to add to that at all.
No, I'm in the push-pull right now. Yeah, I'm on the other side of Karen.
I had a question for Karen. Karen, when you were meeting with your dad quarterly, did your dad still have control of the company? I mean, did you feel?
Technically, yes. He could be quite disruptive sometimes when he'd show up, but because people loved him, and he'd go do things that I could give anecdotes, but technically, yes. But his bigger fear was that I wouldn't be there. He didn't want to run the business without me, and he was retired, and he was happy to be retired. He had already gone off and started another business. So he didn't want to do it. He did not want the job. But he had opinions, but he would run everything through me. And we also had a deal. I'd say, I didn't bring him every little problem. So I'd always say, I have a problem, but then I'd call him and then say, I have a problem. And he'd always say, is it bigger than a bread box? And I would only call him with the problems that were bigger than a bread box. And sometimes they were, but I felt like he needed, I didn't want to hold secrets from him. That was too complicated. I wanted him to know what was going on, good or bad.
And for our listeners, because you had a unique father, we all do. Alan Bressler was Prince Charming. He was loved by blue collar, white collar, women and men. Everyone loved to talk and be with Alan Bressler. He had a magic touch with all people. And so it wasn't hard for him to get data separate from Karen and create a conversation that may not be 100% accurate. Correct, Karen?
That is very true. And sometimes he'd go off and give somebody instructions to go do something that was totally not the direction we were going in. He would just give people random instructions.
Well, that's quite a trigger, David. Have you ever experienced that? You had a father in a business. Did your father ever give instructions that he wasn't supposed to give?
It's never happened, Jeffrey. My dad still comes into the office just about every day.
So how do you deal with it, David?
I buy other businesses and keep moving. He define a lane in which they should operate in if they want to take part in the business. It's hard again. Like for me, this is it's very new. It's only oops, sorry. It's only like 8 months, 9 months. So we're still flushing it out as we develop the company. I think there's some times where I just don't want to talk to you. This is too emotional. Like there's now other people in the organization you can go to get some of those answers. Some people in the organization have stepped up to sort of say, I'll field those questions when they come, and only when it becomes something that really would require my attention does the CFO or HR person say, David, can you please address this with your family member? It's been a challenge, but you got to kind of stay the course because Jeffrey, I think as you said, these the parents have been in this business for an extremely long time. It's what they know. It's in a lot of cases it's all they know, and you feel guilty sometimes pulling them out completely, but making sure there's a very clearly defined lane and reporting structure, which needs to get the feedback loop needs to be constant and needs to be consistent, so that they get the message is my advice.
Before I ask my next question, Rich, did you want to jump in on this?
No, I think I agree with everything that they've said. They've said it all.
So my last question in this segment is really quite simple, and that is it relates to that whole thing. How do you evaluate the performance of family members in a business? Can you do that? Can you do it with a patriarch, matriarch that's been there 50 years, siblings who may be in the business? How do you set up to evaluate those things? And should you? I know Steve and I have opinions about that. And I think so does Rich. So,
yes, I think you have to, and that goes for the CEO, and then the family members, and it has to be done. I think just maybe the compensation is different, but I think the reviews have to be done just like any other employee review. And to understand, and in a 360 fashion, they have to hear it, how other employees feel about them and how they're performing, and where they can get better, and they have to want to get better. I mean, that's I think the key to this is like how does that family member respond to criticism, and does it motivate them, or does it say that I this is my business too, they're full of crap? And I think you want that family member that's going to react positively to a review and progress in the organization like anybody else.
I agree with you, David. I mean, I think, at the end of the day, whether they're family members or not, they're employees, and they're all contributing significantly to the company to make it better and do their roles. So they have to be evaluated. And I think it's like any other evaluation, there should be goals set out and expectations, and you measure them, in accordance with those goals. And it's their, I guess their boss, whoever they're reporting to, would be the lead on that. But I think 360 evaluations are really good. There's outside companies that can be engaged to help administer all that and help with those things, which sometimes in the family dynamic can be helpful to get someone a little outside the family overseeing that. But I think you absolutely have to give the feedback.
I think also, I was always very keenly aware of how family members would be seen by other people in the company. And we had family members in the company that sort of, I wouldn't use the word toxic, but they had a sense of privilege. And so I think the 360 thing, that'll come back to you. I think that's a good idea, but you also know it yourself. And so you don't want to have family members in there that might have a sense of entitlement, or who may not be qualified for the position at all, or coming late and leaving earlier than, well, everybody else has to be there at certain hours, or they get to have different rules. So I think their roles and their rules must be very stringently defined, and they have to be even more, they have to be better, because they're being watched. And we were just telling a story last night of a cousin who was in the warehouse, and he didn't have a position of authority, but we had to fire him because he, long story short, he failed a drug test when he had injured himself. And everybody, years later, the guys in the warehouse said to me, we were all watching to see what you would do. And if I hadn't let him go, there was a whole sense of unfairness to the whole rest of my warehouse crew. So, if you think all eyes aren't on your decisions that you make with respect to family members in the business, they are. And if there's a sense of unfairness, all of that really erodes a positive culture in the organization.
Well, I think
for me, the guiding light is always, what's the best thing for the company? And if one family member is taking the company down, then there's just no room for them, period. Pay them, give them money, do whatever you need to do, but get them out.
I think Karen just said it. It's, the business has to be always the priority, not an individual, not the family, the business, whatever has to be done. And you got to run a business like a business with rules and expectations and monitoring. And you see our producer, Jillian King, has reintroduced herself to all of us. That means it's the end of this segment. Jillian, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. That was an interesting conversation about relationship dynamics in the family business. That wraps up part 2 of this summer 2023 FBA Family Business Panel discussion. Thank you to all our listeners and viewers who have tuned in for this panel. Links will be provided in the video description below to part 1 if you didn't already hear it, and to part 3 of the discussion to hear more on these topics. If you're a fan of our videos, please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and press that bell button. It helps immensely. Radio Entrepreneurs is also active on LinkedIn, so be sure to follow our page there as well for more business advice and discussions. Until next time, goodbye and thanks for listening. We'll be back with more stories on Radio Entrepreneurs.